روني شطح. روني بالحلقة حتنحكى بالإنجليزي مع شوية كلمات عربية لأنه روني أمريكاني لبناني.
I started giving history tours in Beirut. It was called Walk Beirut. And I thought of it as a tribute to other storytellers. I'm not doing it just for views or clicks.
Yeah.
And I don't care if 500 people watch or 500,000.
That's what I like about your podcast.
Yeah.
It feels that you're passionate about it.
I am not here because my father was assassinated.
I know.
And I'm not here because he had a career in this country that was maybe defined mostly, almost entirely to a degree by politics. I think a sizable minority, don't really understand why Lebanon is broken.
Why do you think Lebanon is broken?
Okay, let's get into this. And this will be a nice back and forth, with your permission. Because I like this idea, because I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
Do you want more espresso?
I would love more espresso. Yeah? Does this stay in the episode?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so يلا. اوكي سو اليوم معي ضيف كتير مميز. هو الاونر تبع ذا بيروت بانيان بودكاست، روني شطح. روني بالحلقه حتنحكى بالانجليزي مع شويه كلمات عربيه لانه روني امريكاني لبناني. روني ابن الشهيد محمد شطح. وبنفس الوقت welcome. Just let me introduce just a couple of things. You did Middle Eastern. You have a degree in Middle East Studies, and also government and psychology.
Well, you've done your research
from George Mason's and AUB. You've lectured in AUB as well.
Consulted with AUB.
Yeah, consultant.
Yeah, I can't take credit for that yet.
Yeah,
I may start lecturing actually.
But you're still here in Lebanon, and
Yes.
You have a wonderful podcast. You've hosted a lot of interesting people, probably not for the masses, but they're really interesting. And I love what you do. So let me start just asking you about the podcast itself. Like, how did it start? How did you decide that, you know what, I want to do a podcast in English for the English speakers?
I'll start by saying, since I've done hundreds of episodes on my podcast and other outlets, it's rare for me to be a little nervous.
Yeah.
And I'm a little nervous today.
Why?
Because I'm sitting in front of a master.
Habibi, no.
I've watched you for years. You've been in this type of industry now for, the better part of maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
And we're the same age.
It's true.
But I do get a little nervous when I'm talking to somebody that I deeply admire.
Thank you so much.
And I'll start by saying it's not because you're doing a podcast. I think now thousands of people are doing a podcast بهال بلد.
Yeah.
Anyone is doing a podcast today. It's not that. It's that you have something under your belt that I admire. It's satire.
Yeah.
And that's not easy to do.
Well, not anymore now because we're so polarized and everyone is just...
Yeah.
They're sensitive. We have a sensitive audience, and plus, we have the angriest people. As of the report that came out, that we are the angriest nation on earth.
Right. Or
us and the Iraqis, and the most depressed us and the Afghanis.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, we're doing all right. But satire is what takes somebody, I think, through both pain and politics.
Yes.
And it's a creative way of doing it. So let me expand on that. I think all of this type of work, whether it's satire and CNN, or you did MTV's first podcast, which is now, I'm part of their podcast.
Yeah.
It was called On Air.
Yeah.
And you did it the more traditional way with the headphones.
That's the way I like it.
I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
I think storytelling is the background word. So you can do a podcast, you can do anything, I think, in this world of storytelling. And my journey begins there. It doesn't begin with a microphone. And long ago, in 2005, I started giving history tours in Beirut. It was called Walk Beirut. And I thought of it as a tribute to other storytellers. Storytelling is, I think, also a loose word, so you can play with it. A storyteller could be Ziad Douairi, a filmmaker.
True.
And he was the first guest on my podcast. A storyteller could be Kamal Salibi, an author. I used to actually live in one of his old rental buildings in Ras
really?
Beirut. I'm friends with his nephew. Actually, Kamal Salibi is the only person in this country who showed me his ikhraj aid with his religion removed. And
He's one of the first.
One of the first, yeah. So to me, he's a storyteller too. My tour was a tribute also to recent storytellers that I thought should be remembered permanently. And one of them was Samir Asir. And I used to end the tour at his statue next to Martyrs Square, trying to bring that kind of storytelling back to life. That's a long time ago. So in the last almost 2 decades, I've tried different ways of storytelling. And I think podcasting, because technology is cheaper, because it's easier now to do this, and you don't always need a camera. You could do it still audio format only. I rely on this format to engage people I respect, and sometimes to debate people I respect. And I don't necessarily debate people that I disrespect, and I don't want to engage people I don't care for. I'm lucky. I can actually choose the guest, and I like keeping it slightly above average, meaning I'm not doing it just for views or clicks. And I don't care if 500 people watch or 500,000.
That's what I like about your podcast.
Yeah.
It feels that you're passionate about it.
Absolutely.
And you want to just tell the story, and you're engaging with the guest.
Yeah.
You're very comfortable, and this is enjoyable.
Right.
So let me ask you this. What do you think of the new trend of podcasts? Because I think we have a similar opinion about it. And this is my problem, is that the audience thinks a podcast is the microphone. They think it's an interview, and it should be engaged in a boxed interview method, like question. So I always tell them, no, it's a conversation. It's a storytelling thing. It's you get information that usually you don't get it from a normal interview. And I think now it's getting, some audiences have an acquired taste in podcasts. But the masses do not understand what is podcast.
I completely agree. And I think that's okay, because over time, the ones that should not stay, they fade. And it's not judgment. It's not saying that certain people may have more time than others, or maybe have more flexibility with what they do. I'm not judging. But I think the podcaster that wants to do it, not for money, but for pure passion, I think those are the ones that stick. And they're still around. Other attempts come and go, and it's nice to watch it. And I think it's fun to see how technology adapts. To me, I think a podcast, if it's actually done right, it's cheap. Meaning you're not spending television studio money on it. A podcast should be as long as it needs to be. There should be no time constraints.
That's what I keep telling them. Like, it
Everyone
could be
wants to
2
go
hours
home.
if the guest is interesting.
I think if you finish it in 20 minutes and you got what you needed to, that's fine. But if you need 2 hours, you deserve 2 hours.
Exactly. It's also, it depends where it leads.
It depends where it leads. And also, I think, this is my personal opinion, people disagree on this. I don't think sponsorship or financial success should be the motive. I think if that happens, it should happen naturally. I still depend on donations.
Via?
Well, for me, mostly PayPal. But PayPal,
from abroad.
للأسف, هون you can't access it. Yeah, you need to keep it abroad. And that for me is flexibility, because that's one-time donations. Other types of income, I wouldn't want to do that, because I'd like full freedom and absolute independence. And those are usually my terms in life. And that means something happens. Groups are not easy. Groups, they don't really attract me anyway. I don't find myself in groups just for the sake of it. And also, you live a slightly more modest lifestyle. I've been wearing the same jeans, the same shirts. I'm pretty much the same.
We're the same about this. That's why they keep telling me, like, you can't be in life and on television the same thing. I'd be like,
And that's what drew me to you. 2 things. I could tell you're somebody that I would have liked anyway. You keep your dress wear like me, meaning shirt, jeans, and that's
an American thing, by the way.
But I like it. It means you're not overthinking.
No, it's just comfy.
Exactly. And the second thing, you still have long hair at the age of 43. That's my justification for not cutting.
But you have more hair than I do.
I do have more hair. It's true. You have a more stressful life.
I do. But you actually did. I mean, there's a history. There's a family history. But let me just go back a little bit.
Sure.
So you came to Beirut. You lived in the States?
أنا صراحة السلام I've been going in and out of this country my whole life.
Your whole
so
life.
أول زيارة ب 85 نص الحرب بس ما كن we did not come that much to Beirut. We went almost entirely to Tripoli.
Okay.
So this was when you couldn't cross من مطار بيروت لطرابلس. We do this long trip.
Wow.
من الشام للدقية and then down to Tripoli. That's in the 80s. So my first encounters with this country were during the war and during Syrian occupation and heavy Syrian occupation in Tripoli. But since then, it's been back and forth. I mean, you mentioned my university degree. I forget that that's what I studied. That's going back to the 90s.
Yeah.
And I went back to the US to do my undergraduate. But you're right, my master's degree, I did it in AUB, Middle East Studies. All of that has been a dance, but more recently, in the more recent stretch, it's been almost entirely here. And and if I leave this country, I'm not on holiday. I'm leaving because there's something I need to do away from here.
But why? Why did you choose here? I mean,
I had this conversation last night with somebody about.
Is it because you have Plan B, like you can always go back to the States, or why? Why? I know أنت لبناني. Like I know I'm not going to ask you a tough question, but your heart, is it like Lebanese or American? Or is it both, or?
Something like this came up at 2 a.m. last night.
Oh,
I was
really?
trying to sleep, but I was doing my own research. I was also trying to watch some of your episodes, and I started talking to a friend, chatting with a friend. I think the way somebody expresses themselves or the way they identify, I think it's a very subjective experience.
True.
So sometimes I wake up in the morning and I don't feel Lebanese. Sometimes I do. And I do have 2 passports. Both parents are Lebanese, but I belong to both in a way, at least legally, and that's enough for me to be both. I do sometimes find myself doing silly things, مثلا, feeling guilty that I park my scooter on the sidewalk.
But that's a Lebanese thing. It's okay.
Yeah,
But driving your scooter without a helmet.
100%, which is what I do.
Exactly. See, so you have both.
I have both, and it's the same journey.
Hey.
Well, I still, by training, I still wait at the red light. Nobody is waiting. But I also sometimes can't imagine being anywhere else. And you asked about the heart. I think this is my life experience. The heart wins. The brain doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think the heart dictates everything that matters. The brain dictates things that don't matter. They get you by, but they don't matter. The heart wins. My heart, for whatever reason, it beats better in Beirut.
Yeah. I can relate.
Yeah. And I actually wanted to say that last night, the conversation was me trying to suggest that all of us are in this situation in different ways. If you still have a life in this country, in any way you define it, you're being impacted by all the same events all the time, but you're still here for the same reason, I think. The heart beats better.
It's true. What do you think now after, you've witnessed almost a lot. I mean, you've witnessed 2005, 14th of March, 17th of March.
October.
17th of October, sorry. You've seen a series of assassinations. You were afflicted by this horrible, tragedy in your household. So, after all that, since we're talking about the heart,
Sure.
and I don't know, because maybe it's related. Like, you can relate to what I'm saying, because I got really depressed and nothing happened to my family. But I got really depressed not too long ago. How do you manage those constant feelings living here and not losing hope, or keep the hope, or planning ahead for the future or not, How do you just weigh your decisions, or is it you just living the now and fuck it all?
When I say this, I think a lot of people get a bit hesitant because I'm saying something that doesn't necessarily match expectation. I am not here because my father was assassinated.
I know.
And I'm not here because he had a career in this country that was maybe defined mostly, almost entirely to a degree by politics and many things, narrative mostly. I'm not here because of that. And my feelings towards this country predate all of that. So that event, that tragedy, did not force me to rethink this country in any way. I still think of this place the same way. So that to me at least says that I feel better about that. I'm not trying to chase something that's not there.
Okay.
I believe there's something there for me. But how to cope with that kind of experience, I think unfortunately in this country, so many people have experienced something like this. It may not be for the same reason always. It may not be targeted. It could be indirect. It could be collateral. I'm pretty sure this building experienced the port blast. So where we're sitting probably is now put back together.
Destroyed,
yeah. So even infrastructure where we sit today, where I record my podcast in my apartment in Maram Khair, the fridge is blown up. I've kept it.
Your house was damaged, right?
It was shattered.
Shattered.
But I've kept the fridge as a reminder that if I was recording that day in my home, I'd be dead. So I think all of us we know the feeling to different degrees. But because it's somebody I really respected, and because he wasn't just a father to me, he was a very, very close friend. And I don't like the phrase best friend because it sounds like you're in high school.
No, I mean, yeah.
But that he was my best friend.
Yeah.
Losing that made me run away from this country for a bit. And I did run away.
Where to?
A long time ago, it's 10 years ago, I got a visa to study in the UK, in Scotland. And I stayed in a sleepy town, Edinburgh.
Yeah, that's the University of...
and I did a master's degree there. There was a point in my life I got married and I got divorced. But that part of the story I think is also tied to here, in that I couldn't see myself leaving this country. And even when I left, I was thinking of how to come back. So that, I think, is part of it. Despite my best efforts to listen to the brain sometimes, I don't.
Yeah.
I choose the heart. Why the heart beats better in this place, I think it's so deep.
It's an enigma.
Yeah. And I think it's probably not, you probably can't explain it because that's a feeling. And emotions, when you explain them, I don't think it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's just how you feel.
Do you listen to other podcasters from...
Yeah.
Who do you listen to?
I mean, in the Lebanese scene or...
everywhere. Abroad.
I do listen to Joe Rogan because
Of course,
he's the most
everyone.
listened to, and I want to know why this guy is who he is. So I do, and I do sometimes like the guest, so I want to engage.
So depending on the guest, yeah.
Yeah, but there's certain hosts I listen to, like Lex Friedman.
Lex Friedman,
Yeah.
exactly, my favorite.
Hey.
I actually enjoy Lex Friedman. It's because he's more academic
Yeah.
in his approach, and he has a stoic approach.
Exactly.
He says it, and this is actually what I like, is that I do not know everything.
Yeah.
And that's why he keeps questioning, and he wants to
Right.
know. He's like a sponge.
Yeah.
He wants to, to know more information, and I like that. And this
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to do: to just meet people, ask questions, get
Yeah.
to know them, get to know behind the story, and this is what I like. Joe Rogan is just a bit more, is relatable to anyone.
For me, watching Joe Rogan could be like watching a boxing match. It's fun, it's engaging.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I need that all the time.
Yeah.
Lex Friedman really to me is a scientist. He is a scientist.
Yeah.
But he talks about things that I like to talk about. Before we started recording, you mentioned an episode I did with
Your guest,
yes, Maroon Habib.
Maroon Habib,
Yeah.
astrophysicist,
Right.
بالAUB,
Yeah.
I did not know. It was because of your podcast,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh, I really want to go.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked you. And actually, I advise you to go check it.
Yeah.
Beirut Banyan. Subscribe to that channel, and there's a lot of interesting things to watch. This guy, can you tell me more about Maroon Habib?
I know
You
Maroon.
just told me, he built a telescope.
He's a cyber security expert. That's his profession during
Okay.
the day, and at night, he's like Lex Friedman, in that he's a scientist, but his focus is on astronomy and astrophysics, and he built a telescope through spare parts. I don't know how he did it. I don't know
Wow.
what kind of research he had to do, but he built a not just a hobby. It's like it's photos that I think I got this right. NASA picked up one of his photos, so it's professional quality.
Wow.
Yeah, and he lectured in NYU Abu Dhabi recently. I think he's now here.
Okay. So who منو بالAUB معب
Manu AUB, but we in our episode we talked a lot about AUB's old observatory.
Oh yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean
It's the oldest one.
I don't
Right?
remember if that's the oldest one. ولا كسارة.
كسارة عم بقول سكر كسارة. It's closed.
كسارة is
or-
gone. Yeah.
It's gone.
Honestly, now I can't remember if I think AUB's older. وفي
older.
بال
1912 or
NDU.
something like that.
Yes, exactly. Something. Yeah, 1913. It's pre-Lebanon,
Pre-Lebanon.
and it's still there.
I like that. Pre-Lebanon.
Yeah, those guys.
Although Lebanon is mentioned in the Bible, so
That's true.
that's
You're right.
it. But Lebanon was Jabal Lebanon.
When it wasn't AUB, it was the Syrian Protestant College.
True.
Long ago. But that observatory is gone. Or it's not gone. It's not being used. But he talked about astronomy. That's not Lebanese. That's universal. That's literally universal. So I like talking to that kind of person too. I can't talk to him in any other way. I think a podcast is how you can talk to him.
Yeah.
He's not. You can't make him a TikTok star, or you don't want to interrupt him. You want to let him speak.
Exactly.
And Lex Friedman, some of his episodes are 4 hours long, which is a bit too much. So I like Lex Friedman for those reasons.
Yeah, me
he
too.
brings out the best in those guests.
Yeah, because he's a good listener as well.
He's a good listener.
I intend to interrupt. Sometimes
free.
they tell me this critique all the time. It's like, hey, let your guest talk. I'm like, I just don't ADHD. I don't want to forget the point.
Interrupt me.
No, but no, so far I really admire the way you actually present your episodes and your podcasts and how you pick certain guests.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: why don't you do with just normal politicians or?
For better or worse, since I started, half of the episodes have become political. And that's
Political in content, but not with politicians. Right?
Oh, with politicians. Many MPs, former ministers, during October 17 and afterwards, it went from being a storytelling series. I call it the Beirut Banyan because of the banyan tree. This is the entrance to AUB. There are these trees, the trees of knowledge that spread horizontally. They're meant to connect to each other. So each route is a different episode. They're meant to be stories that you can relate to, and they link. I threw that all away. On October 17, it became about politics. But May 2022, during the elections, it was entirely politicians.
Yeah.
From civil society to the ruling crowd we know. So yeah.
So what do you think about the people that won, the new MPs that won the elections? And what do you think of their performance?
It's a good question. Maybe after I answer, I'd like your opinion as well, because you probably know them as well, if not better than me. I'll give you one example of somebody, I think they'd be okay with me talking about them. I did at least 5 episodes with Najat Aoun Saliba.
Hala, she retired.
Well,
She retired from her protest.
she went home from
She
the
went home.
parliament.
Yeah, but she said something. إنه لبنان برات التاريخ والجغرافيا.
Right. Yeah. So let's use her as an example, because I think she represents many things. To me, this is not a politician. This is a chemist from AUB who's a successful academic, who enters politics, I think, for the right reasons. I don't think they're bad intentions. I think it's actually only good intentions. And runs as a opposition change candidate, but really trying to shake things from within. And she wins. She wins alongside someone else who maybe is slightly more adaptable, Mark Dow, but I think she's the better example because she's new. Mark at least ran in 2018. I think Mark has probably wanted to be in politics from his days at AUB. So
he understands the game.
Yeah, and maybe his career is older in politics, so he has maybe different expectations. Najat is fresh, and she looks different. She looks different than most Lebanese politicians. She dresses different. She talks in a different language. And to me, that's okay. You want to let that person try, and she wins. I think the year and a half of her win until today, everything that happened to her is exactly why politics is paralyzed in Lebanon. And even her thing that she did, her sit-in, her protest, the fact that we stopped caring that she was there, and I think she would admit this. And the fact it's not because people didn't want to check in, it's that people lost interest. And the fact that she goes home with words that are important, but the fact is she loses that stunt. That moment is not hers. I don't blame her. I don't think it's because she's a bad person or, for that matter, incapable. I think anyone trying to do something like that today, completely paralyzed. And her experience, I think, is similar to other change MPs. Not all of them, but in different ways, they're all paralyzed.
Here's the thing. I criticized them. That was the first episode. They did something live, and they invited me. And I was accused of being pessimistic, but I saw it. Because we're in media and we're strategists and we know sometimes these things just don't get attraction from and people lost interest. Everyone was concerned about how they're just going to survive and live. And so, plus, I have a theory that the middle class, when we lost the middle class, we lost the intellectual movement, we lost a lot of the political drive to change, because these people just left the country after the 4th of August explosion. So I thought it was a bad read from them. I was just criticizing. They took it the wrong way, but I do appreciate, like, they're trying to be honest, but this is not an honest game. So I don't know if they were playing the players or playing the cards.
I think part of the reason I like podcasting is also because you can get into narrative and you can suggest reasons for why things move in certain directions. I think some, and it's not just them, I think it goes across the political spectrum. I think a sizable minority, don't really understand why Lebanon is broken. And I think they may think it's for reasons that don't necessarily match what happened. And
why do you think Lebanon is broken?
Okay, let's get into this. And this would be a nice back and forth, with your permission. Because I like this idea, because I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think there's two stories, and I would guess maybe half the population at any point feels like it's one of the two.
We could never agree. But in Lebanon, you could never agree on the same narrative.
But I think the same person can reach both roads in this story.
Do you want more espresso?
I would love more espresso. Yeah? Does this stay in the episode?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so, yalla.
Oh, this is nice. I need to
start.
And I need a quiet espresso machine.
Well, I don't think it's that quiet, by the way.
No, it's... And mine rumbles. I will try to narrow it down so that it makes sense, because I don't know if it makes sense always. let me extend the MPs to us. Let's say
Okay.
it's our generation, and we're the bridge from civil war to post-war, and we're old enough. At least the two of us are old enough to have heard intimately what this country should have looked like. We've experienced how it collapsed through war, and we've also ridden the roller coaster of the post-war journey, which can really be summed up as both some prosperity at certain stages and immense despair and tragedy. And I think both happened after the war. The roads, I think one of them is blaming Lebanon for being Lebanon. Meaning, thank you, Salah. It's very nice of you. Meaning, the country is born incorrectly.
Yeah, that theory.
Yeah, and I think that there's a sizable political audience, and a lot of it is academic, and a lot of it, I think, is well-intentioned. It's not bad intention. Meaning, how Lebanon put itself together, or how it was sometimes put together, whether it's Ottoman or French or independent Lebanon, that's why this country doesn't work. And this translates to system. System is not right. The system is wrong. People sometimes use words that come and go. One of them that always comes and goes is secularism, better than sectarianism. I don't know if that's true. And other movements that come and go, sometimes it's with economics focused. That could be most October 17 discussions. Other times it could be cultural, which turns me off immensely, meaning
In what sense?
blaming communities for behaving the way they do.
No, we should be diversified, and we should be.
Yeah, to me, but that kind of
Yeah.
discussion, I think, happens when the system isn't working, and that suddenly this community is to blame. This, to me, is the worst kind of conclusion, I think. On the other side of the spectrum, the other version of the other debate, it's that the system needs to be reformed. The system is old, it's inefficient, and it's outdated. And a lot of it goes back 100 years. It needs to be updated, but it doesn't need to be thrown away. That is where I land often, and in that orbit, I'm not blaming Lebanese for being Lebanese. I'm putting a lot of burden, not all of it, but a lot of it, on problems that are not political. There's security. And security in this context is not security like private security or even low-level violence. Security could be how the Syrian regime survives. Security could also be why ammonium nitrate is parked in Beirut and not other places. Security could be, for that matter, why Lebanon is paying an immense price for being the geographic battlefield for the PLO in the 70s, for the Syrians and the Israelis in the 80s and 90s, for Iran today. I don't think that's Lebanon's fault. I think Lebanon pays a price for that,
Yeah.
but I don't blame Lebanese for that. And that's where I lean oftentimes on the other side, meaning I think I want to live in a society that's plural. I think sectarianism needs to be adjusted. And I'm happy being a secular person. And I think all can be true. And that is the kind of Lebanon I think of. It may
Yeah.
not be the Lebanon we live in right now.
But let me tell you this: if we were teenagers, and because what happened with the Palestinians and PLOs, and
Yeah.
well, we were not born yet, so.
No, we were. I mean,
No, let's say in 74, 75.
when they first
when they
yes,
started.
yeah.
Let's say we were 15. Would you, knowing Lebanon, سيادة, and Lebanon أولا,
Yeah.
would you have chosen the Muslim side, or would you have chosen the Lebanon that الكتائب and القوات
Yeah. This
were
is also,
defending, basically?
Yeah, I think a lot of expectations have shifted over the last 50 years. The 50 years going back to 1970, when
Yeah.
the PLO first arrived. in that there's a time in Lebanon's history, and what you're alluding to is right. حدا مثل جمال عبد الناصر was a prophet to half the population.
I talked to my dad about that, by the way.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because when he was young, he was Nasri.
Yes.
Qawmiyin, they were nationalists.
100%. And maybe the other half, depending on how you look at it, maybe even until today, Bashir Jmail is a prophet too. So let's say these things are part of history and they're real. I also think that a lot of communities, even though they lean on that, they don't feel like that always. And I'll make it simpler. 2 examples can happen, and both happened roughly at the same time. Kataib kids in the 1960s are more obsessed about sports and scouts. Those same children can grow up and shoot at their neighbors.
They did.
And they could even turn against people that they played the same sport with, and not realizing that the guy that they're playing with is going to be their enemy in 6-7 years. To me, that means you're not born wrong. The same kids can end up fighting each other or playing with each other. And this happened in Tripoli, a city that tore itself apart, but Kataib had sports centers in Tripoli where people played sports with each other, and then you have suddenly people getting dragged around and their corpses are being dragged on the streets. That's the end of Lebanon. You also can include on the other side the same villager in the south that hates what the PLO did to the south. It may not hate the cause, but hates the militiamen.
Yeah.
They can throw rice on Israeli soldiers, and they can also then fight the Israelis when needed. People are complicated, and both are expressions through violence and security. They're not natural expressions. I don't think people turn to violence, and I don't think people are naturally willing to kill each other always in Lebanon. I think security shifts can make communities behave in ways that are destructive. And we were talking about, you said Christian or Muslim side. To me, there's no Christian or Muslim side.
It wasn't before, by the way. When I asked people,
Yeah.
There was no. Later on, it developed into being Muslim and Christian. It was before. It was just left and right, and and people with the cars. And then Muslims felt like they're second-class citizens, so they were like, sure, go ahead and do whatever. And then they regretted it, and then so there's a lot of confused feelings. Plus, this is what I do with historians usually when I sit down and talk to them. It's like, how can we explain to the audience the context that was in when events happened? So you need to explain what type of context. Like I said with my dad, I'd be like, how did you accept, like, you know, like other foreign militia coming into your country, and he explained like what he saw and how he felt, and then you start understanding, because when you think about it now, you don't want any foreign militias on your land. You want your country, you want your government, you want, you have this sense of belonging. So you need to protect it for you and the family, future generations. Yeah. So that's why we need to ask ourselves these questions, and we need to ask, the elderly as well, as like what they went through compared to our generation.
I think if I was a teenager, the way you asked earlier, and the Civil War begins, I probably wouldn't want to be here, because then I'm being put in 2 camps, and neither one fully explains how I feel. And because there's civil war, it's not one militia, and other communities are just sort of handicapped. If it's an all-out war, and it's no longer clear who's right or wrong over time, I would probably leave. I would find a way out.
Going back to the first question, or just answering what you said, Lebanon is broken. So why is it broken? Because we're hung up. We still did not. We were not honest with each other about the past, or we're still hung up in the past, or is it just the system? So I know it's all of that, but now there's a couple events that happened, and it showed that no, there's still a lot of hate. And that actually broke my heart, because our generation, we don't have that hate. We don't have that sectarianism or that meant like we judge and people for just whatever they're. No, we'd like to analyze. We like to see things into context. So when I see even the younger generation now, plus there's no right education since 2013-14. So this generation is all just they're absorbing the sectarianism, and their parents are still hung up in the past. So do you think that's part of why Lebanon is still broken? Would it be fixed, or would it be just Lebanon, the services and the resorts and تأسهر معنا, the best parties?
No, that is Somalia. That is
Somalia?
Somalia has autonomous regions that do well in tourism. There's a part of Somalia that's doing okay economically.
Part of Somalia.
Yeah, that to me is the worst ending to this country.
Do you think we're heading there?
I think we're 2 generations removed from where the breaks really began, the cracks. And I think today, even when you're trying to step away from how to look at the system, let's say, or how to reform it, over time it becomes pointless as a result, because Lebanon died. And borders don't change. It's not like the country's borders will ever be redesigned. I don't think that's possible. And there will always be different communities living together, and there will always be a city like this one. And I think Lebanon as a geography is going to be with us. But the Lebanon I think that we aspired to is dead. And I think that died a long time ago. Attempts at bringing it back to life, or maybe trying to bring a version of it back to life after the war, which is our generation's experience, I think that died too. So what Lebanon looks like later, I don't know. It may not be the country I identify with, maybe. But I don't think, this is a personal opinion, I don't think sectarianism and how we feel about ourselves in those groups or against those groups, I don't blame that for what drove us to collapse. And I agree, I grew up in a country, and this is maybe a shared experience, where to me it's the almost, if it comes up, it doesn't flavor how I think about somebody. So I can watch somebody, I can listen to somebody. When I know what their sect is, it doesn't remove anything from it. It just adds.
But that's just you.
I agree. And I think that's the comfort also of being a bit maybe limited, in that I was younger as well, and I was maybe more idealistic. And I think now at the age of 42, 43, I do have an appreciation for the weight of that. And yeah. Why countries break and why they die and why they are trying, why you try to resuscitate it, all that. I think it's impossible to live in a governable Lebanon when there are security problems in this country that have nothing to do with Lebanon. I think it's an impossible ask. We lived under Syrian occupation. We know what it was like to protest against the Syrians. We also know it took 15 years for the Syrians to leave after the war. That's a generation. That's almost a generation of people accepting that this is governance. And in that story, you get complicated people. Complicated, and I think that's the word to best describe Rafiq Hariri. He would not emerge without Syrian occupation. He is a consequence of Syrian occupation. True. But even when somebody like that tries to shake it a bit, he's out. And that is part of the story, in that security concerns bring up characters with all their baggage. They can't get far. If you go further, since 2005, I can't think of one person that tried to do the right thing, sincerely tried to do the right thing, and is still with us.
Yeah.
I can't think of one. And I add to that, what I can see happening is the permanent acceptance that Lebanon is ungovernable. And you end up with a situation where it doesn't really matter if there's a president or not. Doesn't matter if there's a central bank governor or not. And maybe over time, maybe, it doesn't really matter if the Lebanese army commander is competent or not. I think there's a situation where we can adjust to that, and we're there slowly.
No, I think with the army, no. I think that's that's the last line of. I mean, now there's no police, by the way, but still there's the army, and
you're right. Sorry,
they're doing a lot of things that we don't know, but they are doing what they can with the capabilities that they have.
You're absolutely right. I think I
mean, everything can fall.
No, I spoke too far. You're right. Where the army is not an army.
Yeah, in the traditional sense, you mean?
Even in a basic sense. We've come accustomed to the idea that if Hezbollah is going through Kahale and their weapons are derailed for bad infrastructure reasons, I feel bad for that driver. I think he'd never expected that turn will lead to chaos. That the army chose the way to handle that issue the way they did, to me, is not an army. That's
why.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Sorry, I'm interrupting.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, no. Finish.
Yes, it is the Lebanese army. And there are soldiers that try to de-escalate the situation. All of that is true. And the fact is, it didn't spiral into something bigger. It was...
Because of the army. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, because of... Let me try to step back a bit. You and I have accepted that there are weapons that are not the army's being transported all the time. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Meaning, there are always weapons moving around Lebanon that are not the army's. Okay.
But the army knows about it because the army takes orders from the executive, executives, basically.
Right. You're absolutely right. And that, to me, is a Lebanese army that the word Lebanese evolves over time. It means that this is not the army that maybe I would best hope for in a governable state. It's the ungovernable Lebanon's army. In that it's accepting weapons being sent from probably Syria through Lebanon into a refugee camp.
But
vis-a-vis a sub-state army that the sovereign army is catering to for reasons that have more to do with Lebanon as it exists right now, not as armies behave.
I know. I see what you mean. Yeah. It's true, but that's Lebanon.
Here's
the thing. Yeah. Here's the thing. When I asked people in the army, it was like, by the way, it could have escalated way much more because people wanted to destroy the weapons and a catastrophe could have happened.
Yeah.
But then he's like, this thing is protected by البيان الوزاري اللي عملوه قبل. So even when they confiscated the weapons, القضاء could have just issued that return the weapons. He would have just and that's shameful. That's what you're talking about. But he could have not done anything else.
The fact. Okay, let me say it to include what you hinted at earlier. In the 1970s, the Lebanese army's role expired. The Lebanese army no longer played the role it used to play, which was being the sole sovereign security force in the country. The Lebanese army, and literally that's how the war evolved, it became not part of the war. It became splintered militia killing each other. Today there is a Lebanese army. It exists. There are soldiers that live and they struggle, but it's there. I think the reason something like Kahale doesn't turn into something bigger, this is a belief, I don't know if this matches day-to-day affairs, is that there's no competing militia to Hezbollah.
That's true.
And
no competing militia, and they are the strongest militia in the region, if not in the world, by the way.
I think they're the most successful paramilitary force. But I'll say one thing. I think the reason that Lebanon doesn't go back into a civil war is also because of that, in that the way Lebanon is configured today, there's no tolerance for an opposition to Hezbollah. Now that's good and bad, in that the good is we're not living in a civil war. That's very good. And I can get to here without thinking of how to get here. I just come, and I'm not concerned about civil war. This is a very, very good scenario. The bad is not bad in that discomfort or that it's an inconvenience. The bad is that security concerns, if they're not handled peacefully or diplomatically or regionally, they can lead to that. And I think over time, it's not that every single incident can be quelled. Sometimes you may not be able to handle every single event. And for me, that's a scenario where I live in a constant state of being on the brink. I don't want to be in that either.
But it's exciting, isn't it?
It's exciting. I'll
I'm
tell
kidding,
you.
I'm kidding.
I'll tell you who it's exciting for. This is people that seek a career off of this conflict.
Yeah.
They, I think, enjoy it the most because their occupation depends on it. I think it's exciting for the diplomats that come in and out of this country.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, exciting could also be bad. It's not always good, but I think it's how Lebanon doesn't. It's because we're being robbed of living in a governable country. And it's our generation and the next one.
Did we let them rob us?
On October 17, October 18 and 19, that weekend,
Yeah.
October 20th, I think poetry is the way to go when you're protesting. I think rhythm helps. So كلون يعني كلون is great when you're going to the streets and you're shouting, because that's the kind of phrase that should be expressed. I think your question is hinting at the validity of that kind of statement. I think it works better for protest and venting and unity. I think it doesn't match reality.
No, of course not.
And I think there are bigger reasons and there are smaller reasons, but I think it's impossible to work around Hezbollah. It is impossible. And the fact is, we're in 2023. That group is capable of surviving a lot more than this, but Lebanon is not. And
It's true.
that's, I think, the tragedy. I get very turned off when anyone hints at this being a communitarian problem. And I get this all the time. I've spoken to so many people that want to blame communities.
In what sense? Like what?
The very
الطائفة
تقسيم لبنان,
تقسيم لبنان إيه.
where certain Lebanese deserve Lebanon the way it's imagined, and certain Lebanese don't. I think the Shia community of Lebanon is dealing with the same problems that I deal with. I think the Sunnis can make bigger mistakes than the Shia. I think this nostalgia of the Christians being above it all, I've met very, very unimpressive Lebanese Christians, and I don't know if I want to identify with that as a political idea or even a community in itself. I don't trust the cultural, societal blame Muslims versus Christians. No, I don't think that's not my interpretation of Lebanon. And I think Lebanese Shia living under Hezbollah's thumb, and I'll go a step further. People that vote for Hezbollah, I don't blame them either. I think they are experiencing the same damn issue we've all experienced in different ways. And I also know I know this to be true. I've grown up in a Lebanon where the diversity of that community in politics ended. It's not a natural expression where Hezbollah is the only option and then Harakat Amal becomes the second best. That's due to violence over decades and decades and decades. And you end up in this scenario where the alternative to Hezbollah maybe feels worse than Hezbollah. That's not a natural conclusion.
That's a good point, by the way, that you mentioned. It's like when they toppled governments and dictators, this was what happened with Iraq, this is what happened in Libya. And then later on, the people would be like, yeah, we were way much better before. Like now I see in Iraq, they'd be like, oh, Riz Allah Saddam, or kaza. Or even now in Libya, they're doing talking about Qaddafi وكذا. Okay, so all you needed to do just be a good dictator, you know.
Libyans were robbed of 50 years of a madman's ideas. They were given the worst way of living. I mean, Qaddafi over time looks worse and worse.
But here's the thing. I went into research about this because I met Gaddafi when we were
You
doing...
met him?
Yes. We were doing Superstar.
Oh, God.
Okay.
See, that makes
we're doing
sense.
Superstar, and we had the last two contestants, one from Palestine and one from Libya. And we went into this. He invited us into a private jet. And then we took with us Milham Barakat, Allah yarhamu, and Shab Jilani was with us. And I'm not going to mention...
Who else?
Who
Were there some nurses from Ukraine helping him on that plane?
yeah, nurses from Lebanon.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see, yeah.
And then we went and we flew over. It was a lot of it was a great experience because you get to see it's just totally different culture.
Yeah.
And but here let me tell you just when we first got into because we saw Said. We went to the African Center. We went, just showing off that what he did.
Yeah.
And then at one point when we were going to Misrata, I think,
So this must be, 15 years ago, maybe?
Yeah.
Or more,
It was 2007, probably,
okay.
6,
Yeah,
7.
When he was being welcomed back into...
And the American, I think he was still... just started to get well with the Americans, probably,
Right.
or maybe before that.
When Condoleezza Rice was his desert rose.
Yeah, Desert Rose.
I think he actually gave her a rose.
Yeah.
And recited something to her.
He's very poetic.
Very, very poetic, yeah.
So, and we went there, and the plane was landing, and then it just went up immediately. When I asked the captain what happened, he's like, the captain is Lebanese, he owns the plane. He's like, they gave me instructions. When I went down, it was a highway, it was not the airport. The airport was just, a few hundred meters away.
Yeah.
So anyways, it was just all chaotic, and we did a concert, it was all chaotic. So when we went to, literally in the middle of the desert, and when we passed, there was like huge fences on your right side, left side, just a door with like fence, in the desert.
Yeah.
Fence, a huge fence in there.
Yeah.
And when we stepped into that zone, the driver stopped talking to us. And after like 45 minutes, we stopped. It was beautiful because it was all stars, and the stars, you could see the stars in the horizon. There was like camels everywhere, just wild camels. And then there's a metal detector in the middle, just in the middle of the desert. And there are huge tents.
Yeah.
So we left our equipment, then we went into the metal detector, and then we sat down, and then Milham Barakat, while waiting, he started making jokes. And everyone was just nervous. إنه سكوتش لأنه أكلنا شيء ضيفونا hot dogs أو شيء هيك. And he was like, how do you feel? Anyone feeling anything? And he was a joker. Anyways, so and then he went in, and I noticed something when he was shaking hands with everyone. He kept his chin up, and I noticed all of his pictures was chin up, always like this.
Yeah.
Just like dictators do.
Yeah.
Because this is a sign of greatness.
Yeah.
It's all low angle pictures, and so I kept thinking about that. Then he sat down. He came in with sabo, and it's like when you put your feet just right away, like without even fixing.
Yeah.
And he had a T-shirt with African presidents, Mandela and whatnot. And then he sat down and he gave us a speech about Palestine. And they're like, you guys are singing and doing blah, blah, blah. And Palestine is being... And we're like, yeah, but this is...
Isratin.
Hey, he suggested that.
Hey.
And then we met Mahbouba, his bodyguard. It was a very interesting... so I kept thinking about that. And then they gave us information about how every household... they give them mazout, للتدفئة, coupons for welfare things. He took care of the people, but not enough. But it was, it was stable.
That word, stable.
Yeah.
May I interrupt? At
No,
this
of
moment?
course.
Yeah. That word, stable, I think, is as problematic to me as any the positive spin that destroys a country.
But that's what people tell me usually. It's like, بدك بشار الأسد يطير وكذا ليك شو حيصير بسوريا مثل
Right.
العراق.
So
Or this حيصير بكذا مثل.
yeah,
But usually when you change regime, there's anarchy.
yeah,
This is what happens usually. In any regime change, there's anarchy, and then you choose the regime. But in geopolitics, they take that into consideration. That's why they deal with dictators, because it's stable. See, that's in geopolitics, I mean. No?
No, you're right. And his version of stability was, and I think he's like many dictators in that he's charming in his youth. He's a young renegade soldier who overthrows a kingdom. I mean, that in itself is an impressive accomplishment. And the same kind of character 50 years later, half a century, his whole mission is stability. And stability means keeping him alive.
Yeah, keeping power.
Power. And stability, and I'll take it back to Lebanon. Stability is exactly what Hafiz used to say. And they're here to stabilize Lebanon. Bullshit. Sorry if I don't know if I'm allowed to.
No, it's okay, you can do it.
Yeah.
You can say whatever you want.
Stability to keep the Assad regime going. Stability also is what Saddam used to say, hatta Mubarak, until he was removed. And I think Sisi is probably adopting the same language in different ways. Stability is also the worst diplomatic mission Lebanon has dealt with. In that, now, hatta, what's his name? Yves Le Drian.
Le Drian.
Le Drian. And not just him, it's not about him, but anyone that comes to this country today, they think the mission is stability.
Yeah.
They want to stabilize a problem, when in reality, stabilizing this country just means keeping the problem going.
Exactly, not solving it.
Not solving.
But why would they want to solve your problem? Why don't we solve our problem?
That's a very good question. That's the question that should be asked more, and it should be asked to people that are good at talking. Politicians, all of them, تغيير, معارضة, 8 أذار, whatever you want, whatever exists right now, they say things and they don't answer that question. I think it's a very valid question. If you want to solve a security problem in Lebanon today, and solve it meaning end it, you have two choices. You either persuade the source to think that this is not in their interest, and that means persuading Iran to let go of Lebanon. That's a huge ask. That's probably an ask Iran doesn't want to entertain anyway, and maybe they would not listen. But that's a huge burden, in that tell the source their investment is no longer needed. 45 years of Hezbollah, 40 years, it's over. That's one route, and that's diplomacy. That's something that hasn't happened. It's been attempted. The other route is the unfortunate route, which is you ask Lebanese to deal with a security problem. That's security against security. That's war. There's no other version of it. There's no political chance of ending a security situation. There are attempts at reforming things that have nothing to do with it. And that somebody comes to mind always, Nasser Yassin. I don't think his day-to-day life is impacted by Hezbollah. And I trust this man in that I know kind of where he comes from. I think his intentions are good. But even in that situation, his accomplishments are limited. But maybe he can do a few things here and there. Recycling stations, maybe some pollution levels can be moderated, maybe a few trees can be planted. That to me is not an accomplishment in the big sense. That's cosmetics on the periphery of the problem. That should not be a goal either. And that should not be the best that we can do. And that's the accomplishment. I think that's bogus. But the answers are there. You want to get rid of a security problem. You can't get rid of it by talking about other things. And the change MPs that I think, unfortunately, put the same equation together always. Some of them still do it, and that Hezbollah and everyone else, it's all the same. I think that doesn't answer anything. That actually absolves them from responsibility. And that to me is not how you address issues. And it's not to make it personal. It's not like the more pure you are, the worse you are. I don't think that's true. But if you're entering Lebanese politics today and not seeing things for what they are, I think to a degree you're leading your voters to the wrong conclusion. That's how I see our lost chance with October 17 and the elections.
Here's the thing. With the security matter that you were mentioning, it's not, we can't do anything about it. We have to wait. It's always been, with geopolitics in Lebanon specifically, it's always been an international decision. So meanwhile, if I want to fix my town, what's that got to do with the weapons of Hezbollah?
Yeah, that's another good question. You are absolutely right. I'll answer it the best way I can. I'll put it in levels almost. It's really the right question, and you should always remember that I think it's your gift in that you're able to read through a lot of bullshit. So when you ask these questions, I appreciate them more. You can get a few things done. A few. You can make certain villages or towns more fit for the 21st century. Yes.
Exactly.
There was at some point, I think Zahle had 24-hour electricity. It can be done. Maybe it's not done the right way. Things can be done to that effect. You can have municipal police. They may not be the most efficient. They may not be the most well-armed. But there is something like that that can be done. You can also, at a very local level, you can get your neighbors to agree on things that have nothing to do with this issue. That's true. On a very small scale, some things can be done. And those things, I think, are done every day in this country anyway. If you take it to the medium scale, which is how do you get at least basic governance to function while this problem is left unanswered? That to me, I think, is something that it depends to a degree. It depends on getting rid of national unity.
Yeah.
And national unity is not Lebanon's default. National unity is a form of governance that has been pushed down our throat by Hezbollah. That begins in 2008, and it leads us up to where we are right now. Mish good national unity, not people holding hands and communities wanting to interact, not that stuff. National unity meaning it doesn't matter who's in power. All communities are represented. The ones that work with the problem are tolerated. And then Lebanon falls apart. I think national unity prevents a lot of normal things from happening, and that includes decentralization, which I think is what you're hinting at. And decentralization is part of Ta'if. It's not something that we thought of with recent protests. That goes back 3 decades. I think national unity, and in the old days, Syrian occupation, it turned that idea into something that we just pushed to the corner, and now it lives in Ziad Baroud's panel discussions. It lives in AUB. It lives in research panels. There are experts on decentralization. There's nothing happening on that front.
I think this is possible.
Sorry, I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take it now to the big one, which is if you see things happening that are dramatic, I think that's the end. You're seeing the partition, not in terms of reform or good governance. You're seeing divorce. Yeah. And I think divorce is an option. I think it could happen.
Divorce?
Yep.
What kind of divorce are you talking about?
Well, I think it may not be our generation. I'm trying to now extend it over time. Forget whether it's sectarianism or secularism. Forget if Lebanon should adopt another model altogether. Forget how it functions at the end of the day. You still need a functioning state.
Yeah.
And even the more, let's say you want to go so eccentric that Lebanon is no longer the way it exists. you still need something you can count on. You need some level of accountability. So all of that is really academic right now. But I think as long as Lebanon is paralyzed, ونحن now we live in a failed state.
Almost, yeah, failed state. An aesthetical also situation. So
Before we started recording, everyone we talk about is not here. That's why Lebanon succeeds, is when those people are here. And if they're not here, we're not succeeding the way we should. I think if you drag this out long enough, I can imagine communities that the way you're describing it, they don't want to deal with this anymore. They don't want to think about Hezbollah. They don't want to worry about Hezbollah. I can imagine a security agreement with Hezbollah that lets certain communities govern themselves. That to me is not the country I want to live in.
yeah,
That's worse than partition. That's we go our separate ways, and that's the end of Lebanon.
yeah, we shouldn't do that, by the way.
I think that could happen so long as these problems are put to the shelf. And I also want to say something. I don't blame people for wanting it. There's this, in our circles.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I'm going to take an advantage to do
Actually,
this with you. I'm going to read something that you wrote. I brought it with me. And our circle, I think, is this. I have it screenshotted. I'm quoting you to you.
Oh.
A satirist by default, leftist in human rights, Republican on crime, socialist in prostitution. I like that one. I don't even know what that means exactly, but I like it. Liberal in total, and a realist with vivid imagination. I live in that world, and I like that bio.
Thank
I
you.
also like you don't follow anyone on Twitter. I respect
No, actually, my account got hacked recently. 4
Oh.
months ago. I don't know. I follow people.
You follow people. Oh, I
but
see.
once the blue tick was, they took it.
Yeah.
I got hacked from somewhere in California, and I've been trying to get my account back.
Oh, I see. So you
but-
lost your followers too.
I know. I lost like 4,000 or 5,000.
Okay. Yeah.
But suddenly there's zero following.
Yeah, okay. So then I
Yeah.
I thought I had respect and that you couldn't care less.
I usually I did. I
Right,
used to
yeah.
do that. Like I didn't follow.
Yeah.
I don't know. But then I got interested because I want to follow people. Like I want to know. I follow everyone, like
Okay.
from all sides, because I want to know. That's
I'm-
it. It's not because we don't think politically the same, so I'm not
Yeah.
going to follow you. No, I don't care. I want to know. I want to see what you have to say. I want to
Yeah.
listen. I want to discuss. And that's my problem now.
Yeah.
Is that I really want to sit with everyone.
Yeah.
Even with like I'd like, because we were talking about common friends that say like you don't talk to Hezbollah people, and
Yeah.
but I'm like, no, we should. Even if I know it's not going to get anywhere,
Yeah.
but we should always keep the conversation going.
In those conversations, I'm drawn to that kind of biography
Yeah.
because it makes sense to me, and that you're an accepting person, but you're also a realist to a degree, but that doesn't ruin your imagination.
Exactly.
So this complicated person is what I'm drawn to.
Thank you, by the way, for
No,
for checking that out.
I like that. And also, I can say that I don't blame somebody for feeling a certain way. So this is what I meant earlier. Our circle, we tend to be a bit rude towards the more defensive, more insecure Lebanese identity, I think, which is how many Lebanese Christians feel.
Yeah. Trust me, I'm married to one.
You're married to one. There you go. I don't like to blame them for feeling the way they do. And I don't like to tell them if that's right or wrong. It's none of my business. How they feel is exactly how they feel, with or without my concern. But I can see a de facto situation where that community, as it shrinks, and it shrinks in it's not just demographics, it shrinks in its long-term role in Lebanon. As it fades, I don't blame anyone for wanting to protect what's left. I think that could turn into divorce. I don't necessarily want it to. And actually, I think the mission should be to preserve what's left.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
We should all feel responsible to preserve.
Yeah.
Because even Christians, they are part of the identity of that country, if not the region.
And their contribution to this country is immeasurable.
And the region.
And the region, and
But I take a look at Iraq and Syria, and there's no more Christians left.
Right. So let's say you're living here and you see that as their fate, and you belong to a community that is now less involved politically and has surrendered a lot of its rule in Lebanon to a militia or to groups that work with the militia. I don't blame how they feel, but I don't want that to be the ending. If it ends like that, I wouldn't blame them. I would actually, goes back to your earlier question, which is, I don't blame us for not doing more. No, I think we did exactly what we could given the circumstance.
It feels like you don't blame anyone.
I blame, if I were to put burden.
Let's start with ourselves. No?
If there's accusation, it's to it's
that saying, when I was young, I was smart, I wanted to change the world. As I got older, I was wise because I wanted to change myself. And this is what I realized after 17th of October. It's like we did not change ourselves. So
I think that's where the blame comes.
Yeah.
If I were to try to, I don't blame us for not changing ourselves. We are exactly who we are. What I would blame, though, is every single criminal enterprise that got away with abusing and plundering and destroying Lebanon. And that's why I have no patience for anyone that wants to make peace with the Assad regime. I think those voices that used to be mainstream and now are coming back are the worst inheritors. They want peace, and they want security peace, and they want open relations with one of the worst regimes in modern history. I also don't have any sympathy for Hezbollah's terrorists that kill Lebanese. I have sympathy for Lebanese that vote for this group. Politically, you can talk about Hezbollah as much as you want. But when it comes to murder, and murder that has been accepted as part of Lebanese history,
yeah, unfortunately.
this to me, there's no, I have to blame that. I don't want that in a Lebanon that I live in, and I deal with it all the time. We all deal with it in different ways. And I have blame that goes somewhere a little deeper. Anyone working with that problem today, whether it's for their own job security or whether they're looking for compromise that hurts Lebanon long term, they should be blamed. If they're lying, they should be called out for it too. And if anyone today is accepting of those terms, it means they're part of the wrong side of history. I could blame them comfortably.
Okay, can I ask you, it might be a sensitive question.
Sure.
Who do you think murdered or assassinated your dad?
So this question I get asked every day.
I know.
Every day. And
I know, but see, that's why, because you mentioned a lot of things, and I
Yeah.
know where you come from. So
I'll give you a more recent example. I was swimming بأنفي لحالي بالبحر. This happens a lot. I'm swimming alone. Somebody swims towards me and wants to talk سياسة, and I start swimming away from it. When I بوصل على الشط, people are still there.
you can swim away from that question, but
No.
if not the who, then the why.
No. This December will be 10 years since that happened. So that's, what is that? 10 times 300. Is that 3,000?
3,000, yeah.
Thanks for helping.
Just add a zero.
AUB, yeah. Watch it not be 3,000. That sounds right.
But did they come and tell you?
No, but
like,
let me.
Okay.
That's 3,000 days of living with this question and having an answer. It's I don't think, and I don't need to think. It's that I know, and knowing the truth sets you free from a lot of things.
You know.
I know.
How do you know?
In this man's career, from his entry into Lebanese politics and anything else he did, he was in no one's crosshairs other than one group. For me to speculate other people's intentions means I'm denying the truth. And I don't need to do that. And I mentioned this in several different, whether it's TV or podcasts or even interviews. It's not just because he's not the only assassination. It's not that. It's that there really is no other group left in Lebanon sophisticated enough to do that.
That was the main target with a series of assassinations that happened.
Yeah.
Is that to kill the influence or the game changers.
And because I mentioned earlier, can't expect that much given the circumstance. The only thing that came close to pointing a credible light, it may not be perfect, but it's credible. And it's measured by international standards, not Lebanese only. The fact that there is a report that indicates political reasons why many assassinations took place and attempted ones did as well, from 2004 to 2005. That's the whole 10-year tribunal experience. The fact that their information is there, and the fact that there are names listed too, and the fact that we can't arrest them as well, I think speaks to volumes of what happened. So I'm more than fine with knowing who did it.
And the why?
The why, I think, is maybe I'll say it with a different angle. You and me are no threat to Hezbollah. Talking on a microphone about responsibility. You had a guest on it recently, Makram Rabah, who's one of the loudest critics of this group in Lebanon. He may be one of the top critics. Loud, and also his language is direct, and he punches. I think talking about this group, or even accusing it, doesn't get you on their radar. It's not like the Syrian occupation in that we have to worry about everyone we talk to on the phone, or we have to pay attention to who's listening in the room. And I remember those years where you had to be very careful about hinting at Hafiz wala Bashar. You don't have to worry about that right now. You can go on Twitter, if you get your account back, you can say whatever you want about this group and nothing will happen. At worst, you may be summoned, but that also rarely happens with Hezbollah.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Summoned meaning...
it must be a great security threat to their being, to their existing.
Yeah. I think when you cross the line.
Across the line, exactly. That's why I'm asking about the why, because I've heard a lot of theories.
Somebody we both know in different ways, Dima Sadiq, for example. You can get MTV maybe censored, shway, but you will not be able to get rid of Dima Sadiq. And I don't think they even want to necessarily. Security, though, for them, I think when the line is crossed, that's a point of no return. In that you're doing something that is potentially going to remove the problem. Not the individuals, wala the political party. It's that you're ending the security threat. And I think that's their line. And it's not always at the same location. It may move depending on the issue. Clearly, Saad Hariri was not a security threat to Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Rafiq Hariri was in 2005 in particular. He wasn't in 1995. That is also part of the story, is that the line is not set in stone. And Hezbollah is not the same group always. Sometimes it's bigger. Sometimes it's slightly more conservative. Sometimes people misread it thinking that it's flexible. But there's always a line. And that line, if you're thinking about it, you're automatically on their radar.
Just like what happened in 7th of May.
Yeah.
They crossed the line by threatening their communication outlets and everything. So that's when they did what they did. This is what usually they do, but
You can look at the line and
yeah,
talk about it,
but don't cross it.
You end up like tar bitar, meaning you're showing what the line is. You're even talking about the line indirectly, saying, "Look, the line is looking at me now." The investigation stops. Well, Tayuni begins. He went over the line, reaching out directly to the Iranian regime, and thankfully, his last words are available either on Twitter. He posted it minutes before he died. So he wrote his last words technically on Twitter. And there's a letter to Rouhani, the old Iranian president, that we published after he died. So these things are there. People.
So do you think because he reached out to the Iranian regime, that's the line crossing?
It's making.
Or was it he worked on something with the CIA, and that's when they?
It's not. Because
that's what they say.
Yeah.
That's their narrative that
Right.
they
Yeah.
he worked against in collaboration or whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
So
there's a lot of that. No, he made Lebanon's case, and that letter, and this is now 10 years ago, so it's not the same parliament. That letter was meant to be a Lebanese case to Iran. That means direct Lebanese state engagement with Iran without Hezbollah's blessing. And if it's with Hezbollah's blessing, it will not be that kind of engagement.
Exactly. So
He also did something which I think permanently put him on the radar. Ba'abda declaration. That was never implemented. It was never. It was signed. It was never followed up on. I think that was the beginning of the end. Disassociating Michel Sleiman. He's the national unity guy. He's the consensus guy. For him to speak the language of neutrality, of disassociation, of looking at the Syrian regime as problematic, I think that's where it starts. It ends with my father having no red lines for himself, meaning he went as far as he could before he died. And that, I think, unfortunately, we get used to it. He's now put in a bigger story of March 14 and 12 or 13, almost 20 successful and unsuccessful assassinations. But I don't personally put him there. I put him as somebody who really did not feel comfortable in any label, wala March 14, wala Shitene. I think he grew up thinking that there's still a chance at having some local responsibility and local control. And then he died in his 60s, realizing that it's impossible with Hezbollah. I believe that too. 10 years later, I'm convinced that we can live in this country, but we will not live in a governable country so long as this problem remains.
Well, this has been interesting. On that note, I really want to thank you. I've enjoyed having this conversation with you. I wish it was a bit longer, but next time we do a podcast, my independent podcast.
Yeah, sure.
We'll talk for just many hours.
And you're going to be an upcoming guest. I'd like to talk to you as well.
I'd love to.
Yeah, it would be my pleasure.
I'm honored. Thank you so much for coming.
Salam, thank you.
And I hope to see you soon.
I would look forward to that, and keep wearing and looking the way you are. It gives me inspiration to stay who I am.
Let's be slackers. So.
I don't mind.
Thank you so much, Roni.
Thank you, sir.
Good to have you.